So completely separate from the Kickstarter reveals, we actually got Barabog's effect revealed. We knew this Celestial existed for a while because it was one of the ones that the community got to help name. So now that we have the effect, time to talk about it. But I also wanted to put this in its own video because this card really highlighted for me a concern that had kind of been brewing in the back of my head about set one. And I really wanted to put out that concern out there and also start a discussion on it to really just see others' opinions on it. So first off, we have to discuss the card. So of note here, so this card was revealed on October 28th, as you can see by the timestamp on the tweet. I am reviewing this on November 2nd. Long story short, I've had a crazy past few days since this card was revealed and just never got around to it. So the reason why, negative, positive came out of it, I've been really invigorated to start talking about these cards again. So full energy into this. So let's get started. So Barabog, as you can see, is a 2-spirit Celestial, 1 Earth, 1 Water, with 3 attack and 7 defense. That has the ability, when your opponent casts an Celestial or Rune without using Earth or Water, you can expend, no, not you can, they must expend 1 Spirit. And for those of you, because we haven't reviewed any neutral cards here, that is the neutral symbol, meaning any, you have to just expend any spirit, doesn't matter what element it is. So really interesting card here, as we haven't seen anything really like it so far that I can think of. Because this one pretty much puts a tax on whatever your opponent tries to do, which is pretty neat as they try to answer it. For every card they have to use to answer it, they're having to use 1 additional spirit. Now, this is Ascension Celestial, so it does take a bit more work getting it out here. But as this is a Water Celestial, Tad Puff does work for it. So not you can get it out pretty easily. It does cost you a bit more. And I guess first going over the stats, 3 attack, not remarkable on a 1-spirit Celestial, certainly not remarkable on a 2-spirit Celestial, but that's not the point of the card. As for the 7 defense, though, that's actually, I think, a fine breakpoint for the 2-spirit Celestials, which I think this will be going up against a bit more, as this one probably won't be attacking over the opponent's Celestial, but if it's faced off against a 2-spirit Celestial, 7 defense, not too bad. 7's a common breakpoint in attack for 2-spirit Celestials so far, and by having defense match it, this thing can't be destroyed. And even looking down at the 1-spirit Celestials, this defense is still pretty good, as it's pretty hard for 1-spirit Celestials to hit over 8, and they will have to use more cards, which to do so, which ties into the effect of this card, that being your opponent needing to expend 1 extra whenever they pretty much will cast any card. And so having it so that your opponent can't easily attack over this, they need additional cards, just means that they're forced to expend more. Now, on the flip side of this, few issues I have with this is, one, most likely your opponent, because of this effect, is going to try to answer it the most efficient way possible. And a lot of times, resting on your laurels, which every deck has access to, is going to be a real efficient way to do it, as at most it will cost 2 spirits. And kind of moving a bit tangentially to this, because I think this is more important to talk about first, this card does not work against water and earth. That is 2/5 of your elements. And that's not even to say, like, you can technically run any spirit you want in your spirit deck, even if you don't run that element in your deck, just to play your neutral cards, or even to counter this if it becomes a problem. So cards like Sorlet, even though it has that stipulation that it can't work against something enchanted with wind, that's 1 spirit type out of 5. And it's a 1-spirit Celestial. So it's the risk versus reward on that card is a lot, well, the risk of that card's a lot less, or the kind of, I guess you could say, the floor, the bad cases of it are very low because of that. This card is a 2-spirit Celestial, which means you have to ascend into it, sometimes use extra spirits if you want to use like Tad Puff and such. And this effect is pretty much useless against 2/5 of the decks. Now, of course, in practice, it won't actually be 2/5 because it depends on what elements are good, but the fact that people can adjust to it so easily, I think it's important that, I shouldn't even say I think it's important that it does that. I don't know, it might even be fine if it didn't have that restriction, but it definitely, I think, really limits it, and that restriction there makes this card very undesirable to play for sure, or at least build a deck around it. I mean, sure, you can tech it in if you, on your side deck, that's going to be fine, but I don't, that that needs a very specific deck to want to do that. So it's kind of hard to make that judgment call as we don't know what the decks are really going to be looking like, especially meta decks are going to be looking like moving into it. But I guess the point I can make is, as a deck card to build around, I think it's going to be a very crappy card to do so, and people won't really do so unless they really love this card. So I've kind of highlighted that spirit issue, but I also want to kind of talk about, again, just the outs to it. Obviously, if your opponent's having to expend a spirit, let's just assume that it's not against water and earth, because against water and earth, why would you really go into this? But assuming that you're against a deck that isn't running water or earth, your opponent's going to want to try to answer this as efficiently as possible. And I already listed like resting on your laurels. Another common one's earthquake, but that's earth, so that doesn't even matter. So, and then counter runes, like we got poison tip arrow that can answer it as well. And sure, you're adding on a one spirit tax, but the most efficient answers will be one card answers. And if it's a one card answer, your opponent at most is expending one additional spirit. And I don't think that's worth the payoff here to have to extend into Barabog. And since it's not really having much of a proactive impact on board, it's not a great reactive impact either. You really need the reactive payoff to be really good for it to be run. And I would even argue most of the time you need your reactive answers to be stronger than your proactive answers if you're comparing it in a vacuum, just because you're not the one triggering it. So this, I don't think the payoff's really worth it either from both, even outside of meta context. I just don't think the payoff's worth it for this card. Maybe if it added like a 2 spirit tax on the first card your opponent played each turn, awesome. That actually might be worth it. But as it stands right now, I mean, sure, you can catch your opponent off guard if you know or are pretty confident they don't have the simple answer to it. Sure, you can throw this down and force your opponent to expend 2 additional spirits. That's not bad either, but that does take some skill, and I don't think it will come up too often either. So a bit skeptical of this card. I could see a world where, like, especially if you're like really good at like stall decks and such, that you can just drop this at the right moment to be really obnoxious to your opponent, sure. But even looking at the card pool we have, which I'm going to get into, I don't feel like this card by itself is so amazing. You need good cards to support it as well. So that's the kind of other side of this coin to why I don't really like this card too much, is there isn't really much payoff or support with it either. So now I want to really focus on the payoff and support of this card, because this is where my concern actually comes into play. And that's, what does this really fit into in both earth and water? I mean, sure, water has some stall in it, but they have other ways to go about it. So I don't really see this being a natural inclusion either. I think is the most likely place you could put it, as water does have stall stuff that can help Barabog survive with like cheap tsunamis and such. But I feel like you just build a better water deck with a control focus than this one. So that's kind of where I'm at with this card, but let's get into my concern kind of full force. And first off, I kind of already mentioned part of it as well, how this version of Burn's more of a tax. It's reactive versus proactive. So when I saw like Barabog Burn, my mind went more to the proactive Burn, and it just kind of brought up the issue of the fact that Burn exists in 3 of the elements until this card was revealed, that being fire and wind primarily, with Necrough Eruption and Exaltair, and then also Thunder in Protective format with just Thunderbolt as Zeus, and now with Voltempest as well. So when thinking about Burn, I was just like, okay, most likely the Burn decks will be like Fire Wind or Thunder Wind is looking like the possible combinations, and even like Fire Wind Thunder if you really want to use 3 spirits, which I think is a bit ambitious, but not out of the realm of possibility. This card is not those 3. It's the other 2, Water, Earth. So right away, it's just like, this is trying to build a completely different Burn deck in completely different elements. So that already kind of was a bit of a red flag for me if you want to think about it as a Burn card, which is why you saw my analysis focus less on the Burn aspect and more of a control aspect and having that taxation on your opponent, because it just doesn't fit with the existing Burn as we know in Elestrals. And this is my concern, is that the first set will literally give every single element a card that kind of covers all the different effects that you could possibly give. And kind of with the reason, I mean more like standard stuff, like it's this special enchanting, the destruction, bounce, burn is another good example. It doesn't necessarily have to be all those, but some more common mechanics. that every element's going to have access to those common mechanics through some sort of card. Card draw is another good one. And part of me is concerned that it's going to be an issue for a few reasons. First off, one of the easiest ways when getting into the game is to kind of have decks that kind of cards that clearly have synergy with them, as it helps new players build decks instead of just giving a pile of cards and trying to sort through it, as it can get overwhelming if you have cards doing all sorts of things and you're trying to figure out just how they can interact together. So that's kind of concern number one. And then concern number two is that the decks across all elements will just feel very samey because they have the exact same tools. And inherently some mechanics will be stronger than others, and thus some decks might want to put more into it. I'm a Vanguard player, so usually your cards can only attack once per turn, and you're limited to really 3 attacks per turn. But you have effects that lets you get a fourth and even a fifth additional attack, or I should say 1 or 2 additional attacks, so a 4th or 5th attack per turn, and that's an inherently strong mechanic. So any deck that has access to it typically runs it because it's so good, as opposed to a card that might just increase or decrease its stats, as that can be ranging in effectiveness and is just generally less value than a whole other attack in the confines of the rules. So the reason I bring that up is that I'm concerned that since every deck will kind of have access to every single mechanic, you're just going to run the best cards, and all the decks are going to feel the same for the most part, even if they're different colors as well. So that's another concern. I think that one's a bit lower just because I think they actually have done a pretty good job at making sure cards accomplish those tasks in different ways, and that's how you can also make those decks have access to those game mechanics, but still make those cards feel refreshing and like you're playing different decks. But and I'll be honest, I'm mostly just kind of listing off reasons I have. I can't tell for one reason or another why this kind of bothers me, and I really am worried about it, other than just listing off these examples. I feel like there's like some common thread that connects them all that I'm just not able to articulate right now. But I guess also to provide a counterpoint to what I have been saying, even though I'm just like, burn as a deck, I guess what I was also expecting was burn to kind of be more of a focus in what the elements we had already seen, not really seen in other elements, or earth and water. That way you have a focus, you can try to build a burn deck from those elements, and there you go. But I guess a counterpoint is, as I said, this is a reactive burn. Those are a proactive burn. So I say like, oh, this card's definitely not going to be run. Why are they calling it a burn card? The truth of the matter is, you can have different styles of burn. So in fact, it's quite nice that Water Earth's version of burn is a reactive type to distinguish it from the proactive burn of the other 3 aforementioned elements. So that's definitely a positive. But I definitely would have liked it better if this was released a few sets down the line, as if it would be them just introducing a deck type that you can build within Earth and Water, and that would be awesome, as opposed to now every element having some form of burn. So, but again, my argument I feel like is a bit shaky there because there's such different types of burn, so I'm kind of getting a bit caught up on the fact that this card's just called burn, and I feel like there's not enough support cards for burn. And I guess that's really the final point I'm going to make here. This is the final point that comes to mind, is that for more niche deck strategies such as burn, you really need the cards to support a burn style deck for it to be good. If there isn't enough burn cards, the deck is going to fall flat, and a lot of times you might see those burn tools scattered throughout other decks. So that's kind of the other reason why I was just unhappy to see that Water Earth was getting a burn card, because I feel like we need more support for burn for it to be a valid deck strategy. And those really needed to be in the 3 existing burn types, Thunder, Fire, and Wind. And on top of that, Water has a huge focus issue where its cards are kind of going all over the place, and a lot of them are really expensive. So just for another Water card to be introduced, that doesn't help. That introduces a whole other kind of element, style of play to it. It doesn't really help that focus. I mean, sure, you have Foamy, which can help more easily get into Barabog, but Foamy is just one of those cards that's just going to be generically good in a lot of deck archetypes. But for like really focusing your deck, there really is no focus for Water right now, or no real payoff that connects what all the different cards do right now. or I shouldn't say there isn't, but there isn't like a clear, like really good one that makes you say, oh, okay, I can just fit all these pieces together. So that's kind of my grievances with it. I really want to bring all this up and really now pass it off to you in the comments, as I kind of presented what my thoughts are on it, and that it is kind of bothering me. I'm worried about it. It's a concern of mine. And I really feel like it's also not fully informed. And I can't, just me pondering and doing thought experiments in my head won't be enough. So I want the feedback from you all. What do you think about the points I made? My concern, do you agree? Do you disagree? Why or why not? I'm really excited to see the comments on this, as this is something I've really been pondering and really wanting to kind of delve a bit deeper into in discussion. So really looking forward to reading all those. But I think that's about it for this video. Look forward to more reviews, definitely more positive reviews than me just bringing up grievances. But I think this is a really good discussion, so don't regret making this video. But if you're enjoying my content, make sure you like this video. Comment down below, of course. It really helps with the engagement to get my channel out there. Also, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you all can be notified when I upload. If you're really enjoying my content, it's the easiest way to make sure you are aware when I upload again, as I am definitely planning on cranking out the uploads more now that I'm kind of past this little bump the past 2 weeks, and really am eager to buckle down and start uploading more consistently. So yeah, look forward to all that coming out soon.